Welcome to No More Illusions, the show that helps you see clearly so you can soar. Today, I'm excited to share with you an illusion from a special guest, Nick Jonsson, author and thought leader on executive loneliness. Nick, the last time we spoke was on my previous podcast, Executive Presence Morsels, and if I remember correctly, it was right during COVID.
Yes, I do remember it, Joe, and it's fantastic to be connected with you again here.
Yeah, time really flies, and I'm happy to say that both of us in the world are in a safer, at least from diseases situation. So it was really a pleasure to reconnect with you, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say in our second conversation. Let's get situated since we can't be in the same room. Where are you calling from? And when you look around you, what do you see?
Well, I'm in Phuket, Thailand today. I have an apartment here, so I do some of my deeper inner work here and also get some exercise done and so on. So if I'm looking out, I see a rainforest here. It's beautiful mountains and so on around where I am. And after our recording today and it's morning here, I will go out for a bike ride.
I'm going to just say I'm very jealous. You're in paradise. I'm in New Jersey, which is wonderful, but it's not Phuket, Thailand. All right, great. Well, the illusion that you shared with me was that success, status, and external achievements will bring lasting fulfillment and happiness. Tell me, what does this illusion mean to you?
Yeah, Joe, that's an illusion that I was sort of raised to believe. All the way from younger years, when we start at university, for example, there are scholarships, awards to be won, and we look at the winner, right? We look at the people who are getting these achievements. And I can remember working really hard already at university to getting a bit of that. And from the beginning, I stumbled and I really fell over. But about halfway in my degree, I managed to get a scholarship. And I remember being really happy and excited about it. And there was going to be a ceremony. I even remember, this was in Australia. And I remember even inviting my parents back in Sweden if they wanted to come over to Australia, because I was so proud of this validation or achievement. The next day, though, I can remember being really anxious and worried, because I also understood when I read the rules of this scholarship that I now had to study extremely hard to keep it or I could lose it. So I would say that's the day when this anxious achiever was born, Joe. And I have much more to share about that as we talk today. And because I believe that many times society is built up to really, favor these external validations and so on. So we easily fall into that game, should I say.
Yeah, what strikes me so deeply about what you just shared, Nick, and thank you for sharing that, is that anything that's given to us externally, and you made a great example with the scholarship terms and conditions, can be taken away arbitrarily. And that happiness that was connected, right, in your illusion to that external, whether it's validation or money or position, it can disappear overnight.
Absolutely, Joe. And you said it very simply, and I love how you explained it. Indeed, it was given to us, so it can be removed. And with that, then, after my degree, I went into the corporate world. And of course, it's the same there. We can be getting a job and it can also be taken away from us. We can be giving a promotion and we can be demoted again. And my corporate career, should I say, over a decade was a complete roller coaster. When I came into the corporate world, I only looked up. I wanted to reach the managing director position already before starting as the most junior account executive. That was the only way I wanted to go, because that was the scholarship, right? You haven't arrived until you are MD. That was my mindset. And of course, you can imagine this would be a rocky journey.
Yeah, it's I just got off the phone with a former colleague who was laid off from a different organization, not mine. And we were talking about how so much of our identity is wrapped up in the work we do. And when we suddenly lose it, not through our own choice, and sometimes, well, often not with any sort of preview that it's going to happen, it can be very difficult to process that and deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. And I mean, anyone who's been to a networking evening, you know the normal question, right? What do you do? Where do you work? And it's that kind of dance back and forth. And if we don't fit that bucket, people look at us as wondering, what's going on with that person, right? And that's again what happened to me in the corporate world. And of course, things will happen, right? And yes, I was getting promotion. Yes, I was doing the right things. I studied the KPIs, the targets. I impressed the boss. I did everything I could to achieve that. But sometimes if you go trying too hard, also that can lead to failure. And I did have clashes with some people, because perhaps more it was elbowing my way up the corporate ladder instead of really working, holistically there. And therefore, things would happen. And with some of those clashes, I was let go. And I can remember clearly how hard that was, because once you're let go from something that you are so attached to, that's a big rupture, and I took it very personally.
Yeah, Nick, thank you for sharing that, because I just kind of made a connection that I wasn't originally thinking about. It's not an achievement, but that activity of the office politics, of the relationships, is also something that can give you sort of an external satisfaction, right? Because you have a great boss and you have a great team, and things are going up, but that can change as well. And then all of a sudden, are you miserable because your boss left and they didn't bring you along?
Yeah, absolutely. These things, again, are external changes, and a lot of things that happen outside of our control, right? And if we react to that, then it's going to be hard. And again, I was in another role, in a more senior role, where I did incredibly well. And I really felt that this time I have arrived. They really looked after me. They did everything. I had everything I ever dreamt of. And I couldn't imagine that something would happen to this, because this was the perfect world. Well, as we know now, that was an illusion, because this perfect world got into a merger and acquisition. And as they were looking at the numbers, I was in that bucket of the people who were expensive. So the new investors clearly said, this has to go, this has to go. And overnight, my boss, the CEO and the old owner, who I was so close with, who I trusted so well, called me into his office. And he was in tears before I was in tears, and I was let go. And with that, I crashed out of the corporate world, and that was my last exit just over a decade ago.
Yeah. So would love for you to explain, Nick, a little bit about how this realization happened for you. For some people, it happens all at once. For other people, it's a process. When did you start to realize that maybe not that you were on the wrong path? I don't mean from a career perspective, but maybe in your way of thinking about a fulfilling life and purpose, that maybe what you had thought was the way was not the way. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I didn't gradually start to think about this and plan and prepare for this when I was in the corporate world. I wish I did, but that was not my case. I was completely unprepared. I did not even have a CV updated. I did not speak to any recruiters. I didn't have any personal project apart from fitness, being interested in triathlon and so on. But I had not built an executive presence. I had no podcast. Nothing of that was sort of happening on the side. So for me, it was a big, big step to start to explore what I wanted. And I did it perhaps the painful way, the expensive way, both for my health and for everyone around me. As a result of being so unprepared for this, and my world come crashing down so hard, it also led to my divorce. It led to the separation from my ex-wife. My son and I got separated, and I started to really, really, try to figure out what to do. I jumped from startup to startup, investing money, and I also almost became bankrupt as a result of all this. So I did it exactly the way that I wouldn't recommend to anyone who's listening to do it.
So you're still, I guess, reeling from 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 the corporate world and all the machinations and ups and downs. And I love the roller coaster metaphor you use, Nick. When did you start to stabilize or start to see the world a little bit differently? Was there an event? Was there a conversation? Was there a role model? How did you start to sort of see that?
Yeah, it took me about 3 years from my exit from the corporate world until I sort of found myself and found the right path. And it didn't come again from these new roles or what I was doing externally. It more came from the internal growth. And it was when I started to speak up about my feelings and seeking help for my inner work, and including therapists, psychologists, coaches, and to talk about the feelings, the emotion, and the loss and the grief of the loss of the job, the loss of my ex-wife, being separated with my son. And when I started to work on all those things and being able to name the feelings and getting the support I needed, that's when things started to change.
Interesting. You used a word from your book last time we spoke, and I found it very evocative. When I was re-listening to the podcast, Nick, I wanted to mention it again. Smiling depression, right? This idea that people can just seem like they have it all, but deep down inside, they are not in a good place. Can you talk a little bit more about how you sort of came up with sort of that expression and what that means to you?
Yeah, so indeed, smiling depression is a good explanation, I think, of how I felt myself at at that moment when things were collapsing on me. I was still to the outer world assuring that everything was great because it was a big defeat and I wasn't ready to speak about it or admit it to anyone. So the best way to do that was to just smile and tell everyone that everything is great and not open up or share anything of the pain points, what actually is happening, because if I do that, then maybe people will judge me or they will push harder, and I wasn't ready to talk about it. I didn't know how to express it even in a private setting. I didn't talk to a coach or counselor at that time about it, so I didn't do any work. Therefore, I didn't know how to talk about it, so I just had to really protect myself, making sure that no one finds out. And of course, if we smile and say that everything is great, how would people be able to know? And I think during this time, I became a very good actor, and I could really, really show it. To the point, I can add that actually I'm remarried today, and I had met a woman during this time, during my worst phase, who had no idea that I was actually going through a difficult time internally. She thought that everything was absolutely great. She was absolutely shocked when I told her the truth that, by the way, behind that smile is a lot of pain. She did not believe me.
Wow. Wow. So totally fooling others with your ability to just mask the pain, the trials. So at some point you shift into helping others. With this, you probably look around and notice, like, look, it's not just me. This is something that's, for lack of a better word, rampant in a lot of corporate cultures or organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that journey? And I don't want to overstate this, but it seems like this is your purpose. This is a large part of your purpose going forward.
Yeah, and just as much effort as I spent and energy, I should say, to protect myself from being found out that I was going through a difficult time, I realized once I started to speak about this and own my journey and share it, that's when other people would start to feel safe to also open up about theirs and their feelings. So as I then had these conversations, that's when the idea was born out of, I should document this, and I wanted to survey and find out more. And as I then started to survey people in the workplace, I found out that about 30% of the senior executives I surveyed, and this was a survey in Southeast Asia, mainly in Singapore, so these people in leadership roles, about 30% of them had feelings of isolation or loneliness inside of work. And then a follow-up question was, well, if that's the case, would you speak to your HR, your boss about these feelings? And 75% said no. And then a follow-up question to this, would you seek professional help, such as seeing a counselor or a therapist to work on your mental health challenges and loneliness feelings? 84% said no. So armed with this information from this survey, I understood that it was not only me who was able to sit there with a smile on my face when I clearly was not in a good space.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, but I'm going to ask Nick. Maybe this has come out in your research and your experience, speaking with individuals about this. Would love to hear a little bit more about the drivers behind those statistics, right? Like why people will never speak about it to their boss or to their coworkers, why people will never get, professional help. What have you found is sort of driving those decisions, which, clearly can be against your best interest to hold that in and smile as if nothing's wrong?
Well, just like in my case, I didn't also open up about my feelings and what was happening in the workplace, and I found the same answers when I was interviewing people for the book. It is for a few reasons. One is, of course, the fear of being judged, but it's also, if you think about, you're in the corporate game. Let's say it's a game in the corporate ladder, that climbing the top, and if you are sharing that you are going through a difficult time to your boss or to your HR, then naturally they're going to take that perhaps against you when they're looking at the next promotions, right? Who's going to be up, who's able to hold it together, who can handle a bigger region, who can handle more responsibility. Well, that person who just opened up, who clearly is going through a difficult time, well, we can obviously not consider her. She is not ready for it. She's going through a tough time now. So that would just not be possible. And then, if you also think about it, what about the upcoming bonuses and that need to be signed by these people? Why would I share some of my weaknesses, which is seen in this case, right, or my challenges with these people? Because then maybe I won't get my full bonus. So these are all the kind of reasons why people will do everything they can actually to protect it, Joe. And now being a coach and a psychotherapist and counselor, I can share that many of my clients are actually senior executives and even many CEOs in the US. I'm based in Singapore because they don't dare to hire a therapist in their own country, even in case someone finds out.
Wow. And they're certainly not going to go to a physical office and be seen, in a waiting room of a psychotherapist. That's never going to happen.
Absolutely not. So this is exactly how it is. And no one will use, even though they maybe can use the medical insurance for these sessions, they rather self-pay to make sure that no one find out. But still, this is great that people are starting to seek help. And it's wonderful that we can do these sessions online on Zoom these days, so that at least we're starting to seek help. And conversations like you are driving today, Joe, it's also helping because this is normalizing the conversation. And hopefully someone is listening, they can take the step forward and start getting the help they need.
Well, Nick, I would like to run something by you that doesn't really help with the disclosing it at work, but I feel like we have to call it out. Brene Brown, which everyone knows Brene Brown and her work on vulnerability and empathy, she recently spoke, at KPMG at my organization. And it was just wonderful to hear, all her wisdom and advice. And the one thing that's always stayed with me about her work, especially with regards to men like you and me, it's this vulnerability and shame that really stops us from getting help, and this misunderstanding that vulnerability or the ability to be vulnerable is actually not weakness. It may be seen or spun as weakness by others, but in actuality, and maybe you've seen this in your work, there's incredible strength required to make yourself vulnerable. Can you share a little bit more on that piece?
Yes, I love how Brené Brown normalized vulnerability, and also that is starting increasingly to be seen as a strength rather than a weakness. And that is something that also in my conversations that I'm driving, and that's what I believe that we are doing today, Joe, that we are talking about being vulnerable as a strength, because if you look at it and aligned with what Brené Brown says, is that if you are a leader and you are going through a difficult time, to keep that inside you will not only damage yourself, but also the organization, because that's almost like you're keeping some secrets. But if you as a leader can share that we have this challenge here now, and I don't have all the answers, can you help me? That naturally going to lead to that more people in the organization will be on the course supporting it and looking for the right solution. So this is also linked to a conversation that I love to talk about, is psychological safety, where it is about creating this culture where people naturally are vulnerable and naturally are speaking up when they feel perhaps isolated or feel that they don't have the answers, because that is absolutely how we beat this, and it is the leaders who have the capability to be these drivers of this.
Yeah, I know that's a very important concept. Just like vulnerability, I think it's getting a lot more attention in organizations. I came across this recently with a colleague that I was talking to in a different organization about how their company is very concerned that people will not speak up if there's no safety. And not speaking up isn't just a danger to their psychology, which is very important, and their mental well-being. It could be a danger to sort of their clients, to the team, to the business, actually, because, hey, there's this button that someone shouldn't press and it got pressed, and now no one wants to say it because they're afraid they're going to get their head chopped off, even though they're the one who didn't press the button.
Yeah, I see that all the time, Joe. And again, we just have to, as leaders, and it doesn't have to be leaders of a business, it can be leaders of a family, leaders of a community, leader of a WhatsApp group, a men's group, or whatever that I'm involved in. We can set the scene and be vulnerable first so that others feel safe to be vulnerable too. And the beautiful thing here, and I would love to share a story here, Joe, because
Please.
One of the ladies I interviewed for my book, the Executive Loneliness book, she at the time was the managing director of a big international bank in Singapore. So here is this powerful, successful woman, but she is a woman in a man's world, especially in Singapore. At the time, less than 10% of women on the boards. So she's surrounded by men, and obviously it's a tough gig for her. She has to work really hard. And on the outside, it looks like everything is perfect. She has all the perks. She has children with their own nanny, children in international school, car driver, the house, and so on. Everything that it looks like that people would love to have. And when I interviewed her for my Executive Loneliness book and asking her the questions about loneliness, isolation, she was really rock solid. She didn't share anything, didn't answer anything that was interesting enough for me to be able to make it into the book. Through that way. But the day after that interview, she sent me a WhatsApp message. And she said, Nick, could we meet for coffee again? I have something I want to talk about. And I said, sure, we can. And I went to see her again. And just as I sat down next to her, she just grabbed me like this, looked me in the eyes, started crying. And then she said, Nick, I rehearsed my own suicide twice.
Oh my gosh.
And then this was her sort of, should I say, surrender moment. And she felt safe enough because I had shared what I had gone through.
Yeah.
And I provided this safe space where she could speak about it. But she wasn't ready the first time. But because I had done a self-disclosure, she decided to come back. And as she then shared about the lead up to this and how it all happened, it all started with a small little incident. That she had an accident, a small scar on her lip, got a few stitches, and she felt ugly. With that, she started to push her husband away at home. And at work, she locked herself in the office and didn't go on the lunches with her colleagues and so on. So she isolated herself both at home and at work. Instead, she started to work long hours, working harder to impress the bosses to overcome this. And this went quite quickly. It was over a few months from this happening, this isolation. Suddenly, she expressed that these suicidal thoughts just came in out of nowhere in her head. She never had them ever before. And because she didn't talk about this to anyone, it just kept going downwards, spiraling downwards. And a year into these thoughts, it went as far as her even going to the location where she was going to do it and looking at everything. The good news here is the fact that she found this safe space, and when she grabbed me and said, Nick, I rehearsed my own suicide twice, the pattern was broken. The pattern was broken because I was not part of that plan. And we know this in therapy. This is what it's about in CBT. And so it's about breaking the cycle. And that's exactly what happened. With that, she was snapped out of that. And with my permission, then I called in additional support, and we also called in the husband, and we had a conversation about it. And the outcome from this was that she took sabbatical leave, and when she came back into the workplace with my support and my preparations also to guide her, she, on an all-hands meeting in a bank, shared what had happened to her. And that changed the culture in this bank overnight, from being a culture where everyone was closed to speaking about challenges. And you can imagine how big transformation in a heartbeat by this woman sharing her story and owning it.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. I mean, I think sometimes people have in their mind what the reaction will be, and sometimes it's quite the opposite, because as you've shared, a lot of people are going through the same thing, and they just need someone else to go first in order to feel safe, that they can express, I'm so glad you said something. I've actually been going through something very, very similar.
Yeah, and even, now I touched on perhaps the end of the spectrum here, suicide thoughts and so on, which is, we think extreme, but this is very common. I hear it quite frequently in my conversations now with senior leaders, and that is ultimately where this will go, unless we address it early on. Unless we address it during that phase when we start to feel isolated, we can feel something's wrong, but we don't act on it, then eventually that's where we will end up. So that's why, we need more of these conversations, and we need to naturally start feeling our body a little bit and knowing, is everything okay here? If it's not, well, if I have an arm that is broken, we naturally will go and get an X-ray or an MRI and fix it. We need to have the same instinct when it comes to our mental and about feelings and about isolation. It is not okay to keep going with those feelings for a longer time. We need to seek the help we need, and help is there, right?
So, Nick, wanted to share with you one thing I experienced, certainly not as heavy as what we've been talking about or fundamental, but I do remember a time where I felt quite lonely. I was overseas. Like you, I was in Asia, I was in South Korea, I was studying. And over the summer, a lot of my college friends, we were together, hanging out, running around, and then they all went back either to school or to jobs. And I was scheduled to stay for the entire year. So my support system or my colleagues were gone. And I felt alone, not abandoned, but I felt very lonely and alone. And I remember distinctly this one night I was just in my boarding room or boarding house and thinking, I'm in a city surrounded by millions of people. And in a weird sort of way, I feel more alone being surrounded by people than if I was just, in a hut someplace in the mountains. It's almost like the juxtaposition of all these other people. And in your mind, you think they're all happy and have wonderful lives. You feel, it almost makes you feel more desolate in a large space. I don't know if you've come across that in companies or cities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think, is very normal that we feel like that. If we don't have a tribe that we belong to. We have to remember that we are social animals, that we need really the social connection. So if we're talking about, in the world of recovery, if we look at the 12-step programs and so on, someone who has faced, let's say, alcoholism or drug challenges or gambling or gaming and so on, they might belong to one of these 12-step groups. And the recommendation is, if you travel anywhere in the world, these networks exist there, go and attend a meeting there, because that is obviously your tribe. You will meet people who have gone through a similar challenge before. You will feel the connection, you will feel safe. Well, if someone believes in a certain religion, people might, look up going to a church. And these are the kind of stuff that I've been working with my senior executive leaders, coaching clients and so on. When they're going on business trips, we actually are thinking intentionally about this, looking at what city are you going to? Well, based on your belief, there is a church there. And I helped one of my clients now, who's senior finance lead. He went to San Francisco recently, and we even looked at the location of his office versus where a church, which he could read a good review about, was, and then he booked a hotel close to that. So he was intentionally already looking it up, looking in the calendar, sticking this inside his in the calendar. He would arrive on a Saturday, and on the Sunday was the church service. He could join that. Not only did he have a wonderful time, he also made some social connection, made some friends there. So we can be intentional about this loneliness, because if we don't think or plan for it, we might just end up like you, sitting there feeling a bit lonely. And then what do? Maybe we stretch for our digital devices, and we're going to feel even more lonely.
Yeah. I mean, throughout this whole conversation, and me, Nick, I'm all about the connection. It just strikes me that, in your work and these conversations you're having with people and these transformations, there's so much power in connecting to another human being and being seen, them seeing you and you seeing them. It's just so powerful. And would love to hear a little bit more about how you've seen people kind of move along that path, right? Because they feel unseen because they're all alone. And then at some point they start to feel seen, by others, whether it's therapists, family, bosses. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that process unfolding?
Yeah, and in the conversations again with my coaching clients and therapy clients, we typically go back into the childhood, and one of the exercises I do is to ask themselves what they love to do as a child. Most often, then everyone will just go completely blank and have no clue and no idea. Most people have forgotten their childhood, but I then give them a homework to be curious on that and see if they can map together pictures from there when they were a child. And if someone is still alive, you knew them as a young child, have conversations with them and also share. So you can start to map together your childhood. And if perhaps there was some hobbies or passions there that you can bring into life again in your adulthood. One of my particular clients who went through a very difficult time after the pandemic, he had lost both his parents from COVID during the pandemic, and then he lost his partner also during this time. So the three people closest to his life were gone, and he felt an incredible grief, loss, loneliness, and isolation. And he was in a very big depression when we started our work. But these questions then helped to map out and get a bit of an understanding what his life looked like until he was a teenager, before he set off this successful career. What we then identified was he was part of a swim team in high school. And he was actually 68 years of age when we started this work.
Oh, wow.
And he had not been in the pool for a long time. And the first homework then was to look up the pool squads and map out what was there, and then at least attend one just to sit in the stand and to be curious around that, to explore and see if something came back to him. And he said that he enjoyed the experience. Literally, that the next assignment would be to join one of these squads, and I promised to join with him. So we joined then a swim squad that I belonged to. And he felt that, oh no, I'm too old, I cannot do it. But he agreed to do it. He jumped into the lane, and he absolutely loved it. He fell in love with swimming again. He joined the swim squad, and started to train. Now he's just turned 72 years of age last week, and he a month ago won a 3 mile ocean swim, 3 miles ocean swim, the Ocean Man competition. So he has now full connection, health,
Wow.
purpose, and so on, and he feel like a teenager again, and he's 72. So here's just an example of how we can actually have this conversation to bring back connection and meaning in our lives.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a really good segue into something I wanted to ask you, Nick, just so we can get very clear about it. And that's if the illusion is that success, status, and external achievements will bring lasting fulfillment and happiness, what is your truth? What is the truth that actually brings that when it's not those other counterfeit forms of fulfillment?
Yeah, so the truth is that we got to find out what the real and the inner drivers, the inner purpose is in ourselves, and really double down on that and don't compromise on that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't perhaps have a day job that pay money to put food on the table for our family and have a house, but it just means that we can be curious and doing perhaps those things as our hobbies outside of work or during the evenings, at least to a start, or on the weekends, so that we live a more meaningful life.
Yeah, I love that, Nick, because I bristle a little bit when people are so binary, right? They're like, if you're not doing your purpose or your passion, every second of your life is being wasted, or versus that's ridiculous. You need to provide for your family and your old age, and that's just trifling. I mean, I feel like neither of those extremes are particularly helpful to human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. We can hear it a lot, and it's easy for someone to say who has done that journey, and but it's transition. For me, it was a decade. I would say I now have a more balanced life, and I'm able to do the things I love to do. But that was not overnight, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to do it in the way I did it. It's better to build gradually and more holistically.
So we talked a little bit about the realization, how people connect with their sort of inner purpose. What have you seen as different outcomes once people start to come through the illusion and embrace the truth? How has that improved, people you've interviewed or your clients' lives? What have you noticed, Nick?
Yeah, so once people have found a bit of purpose and meaning in their life, everything changes, right? Because they feel that they're no longer cheating themselves, so they can show up, better for themselves first before others, right? And people are sleeping better, losing weight, and the skin looks better, and everything changes, right, in people, and you can just hear that they sound different. And no longer is it about themselves, but it's about service. If you see people who are out there, part of charities, the Rotaries, and constantly looking at being of service, that means that most likely these are people who, have done that journey and understand that meaning doesn't come from the titles and achievements, but rather than being there for others.
I find it fascinating what you shared, how that internal shift can affect your complexion, your sleep patterns. I mean, it's amazing how you haven't taken a pill or maybe even done a special exercise, but it's been affecting you and your body and your whole system for so long you don't even realize it.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I did a TEDx on this topic actually, and on sleep. It was on sleep, but I basically put myself on the sleep experiments for 1 year, where I was testing what happens to my body and my results if I, for 1 month, double down on sleep versus 1 month when I sleep, let's say 1 hour less in average per night. And the impact on my life is unbelievable. I also did
Really?
2 different Ironman races, and similar races, comparing the times. And the month when, instead of overtraining and really focusing on the training, but rather doing everything I could to sleep extra, hit the best result in any race of my life. So,
Wow.
self-care and so on just results in us, delivering better.
Well, Nick, I'm glad you shared that because I feel like maybe that's like a hidden key almost that, with the overwork and with our devices and our need to distract ourselves, I feel maybe people aren't getting enough sleep, right? So you think it's, you know, just one thing, but in actuality, if you could get your sleep right, you could start to see things drastically differently.
Yes, absolutely. People are not getting enough sleep. We know that, right? And people are falling, especially with it's a huge issue. And I've heard numbers from CDC that about 1 in 3 Americans are not getting enough sleep. And we need sleep in order to deliver. And if we are spending the evenings on social media when we typically would read a book as a part of winding down, then we're setting ourselves up for failure already, right? So, and then if the next morning, the first thing we do, we grab the phone to see the world news, which could be negative, then it's just going to be a downward spiral for that day as well. So we got to be intentional about this. And that's what I did during my sleeping experiment. And I shared an article on LinkedIn on this also with 50 sleeping tips. We really need to spend effort and time to protect ourselves.
Yeah, so Nick will share those links with me and I will include them in the show description as we kind of start to wrap up our conversation, Nick. For those who are listening who either may be experiencing loneliness themselves or maybe suspect that there is a colleague or a family member who's experiencing that, how can they learn more? How can they connect with you or check out your book? I know it's an audiobook as well. How can people take that first action, that first step?
Yeah, so Joe, the first step is really to have the awareness ourselves, right? To ask ourselves, do I have some feelings? And if so, then the next step can just be to journal on it and try to describe it and write it down. And then the next should be, who can you speak to? Is there someone you feel safe with? Do you have a friend, a mentor, a boss, a HR, a wife, a husband, or a friend, or some coach or therapist who you can call? And if you don't know anyone, reach out. And there's so many helplines, hotlines, and coaches that you can have online sessions. And I'm happy to also to have a call with anyone who's going through these feelings. Just reach out and I will happily jump on a call to speak. That was my turning point, and my turning point when I started to own my stuff and to talk about it. That's when I started to really do this V-shaped recovery. So I can recommend anyone who's going through a challenging time that your transformational journey lies from a 20 or 30-minute call around the corner. So take that action.
Thanks, Nick. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've learned new things about you, and I'm so pleased you're continuing to do this work to live out your purpose. So thank you so much for being our guest on No More Illusions.
Thank you, Joe, for a wonderful conversation. Thanks to all the guests.
Quick announcement. I'm excited to share that Unlock Your Executive Presence, Feel Like a Boss is now available as an audiobook. You can get it now at connectioncounselor.com or just search Unlock Your Executive Presence on Amazon or Audible. It's my second audiobook, and I took a lot of care in producing and narrating it for those of you who'd rather listen than read about how to actually generate executive presence. Thanks for listening to No More Illusions, and thanks to my guest, Nick Jonsson. I'm Joe Kwon, the Connection Counselor. Take care, and remember, clarity reveals, illusion steals.